Welcome to UberCube, the podcast we discuss all things Cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka UberBear, and today we are joined by the trifecta, the triumvirate. We'll start with the one sitting next to me.
Hey, this is Stu.
And then the one that I'd prefer that would be sitting next to me.
Hi, damn. Well, it's me. It's May, also known as Magic.
And then we invited another one too.
Well, it's Chris, otherwise known as Sammich.
See, that's how everybody's so happy. Happy Friday, guys. Everybody have a great work week this
I feel
week.
like we should have like a bonfire going or something.
We should.
Like
We should be sitting
Guitars,
around. It's beautiful out.
Glasses
When I come
of
out and
booze.
visit,
Yes.
we should have a bonfire.
All right, I'm your
As
huckleberry.
long as nobody brings marshmallows.
I had
Marshmallows
teamwork
are
week.
disgusting.
Does that count?
So we're here to talk about a couple of things today. We're going to kind of keep this short and sweet, but I like to kind of do that little business in the front. And what we're going to kind of summarize is we received the deck list from our 3Os that were featured at CubeCon 2024. And in addition, we're going to kind of talk about some of the potential remedies or ideas that we have from the new set Foundations that's coming out that's kind of been a gift for some of our cubes for different reasons. And, you know, it's spoiler season again. We're there again, but it's kind of nice, frankly, when you're coming back and you've received feedback about your cubes and how you might make them better than they were last time, that you now have a new, I guess, consortium of cards to choose from. So I ain't complaining. But before we go any further down this conversation, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube, and we're going to enjoy our libations of the show. We're going to start out with our special guest, Chris. What are you having on this delightful Friday?
Been something from Island Brewing out in Nashville. It's just a West Coast IPA. It's very good.
How about yourself, May? You were pre-gaming with us and brought this something that looks like a beaker, and you says it's not a beaker.
So my little witchy concoction here, since 'tis the season and all that. Oh, well, I guess October's over. But the point is, I made a grasshopper, which is creme de mint, creme de cocoa, a shot of vodka, some cream, and some oat milk. And then shaved some dark chocolate on top.
Hell yeah. I love a grasshopper. I can only have one, but it is one of my favorite drinks that I'll have on rare occasions sparingly. What are you having today,
It's really
Stu?
good. It tastes like melted chocolate mint ice cream.
Yeah, it's like a
It's so
Thin
good.
Mint.
It
It's
looks
really
bloody
good.
awesome, and the color. Like I'm very I taste with my eyes first kind of person, right? Not that necessarily things will put me off, but that color is like I want to paint my walls with that. It looks fantastic. Yeah, and I've got myself Noda Carolina Brewed Little Slurp. Juicy India Pale Ale. What about yourself?
And I guess he swapped with me and took mine and gave me a little slurp too, and I didn't realize it just
Yours
happened.
is in the fridge.
So let's combine our powers together
All right,
and
combine.
twinsies. All right, so we're going to have a little bit of fun here. So we're going to kind of multi-part this one. It's with intent. So we're going to shorten this episode up because there's a lot to cover. At least I believe there is. So I thought that would be prudent in order to cover this in a part 1, part 2 of this. So you may hear some overlap in intro and whatnot for the essence of time. We're doubling down here a little bit.
Well, we're getting towards the holidays.
Yeah, we wanna
we're
get
now
ahead.
into November. Thanksgiving's coming up and Christmas, so we want to try and get ahead of the curve a little bit. But I think this is worthy of breaking up into a couple of episodes because I know that these cubes, again, they were featured at CubeCon. They were very popular. Lots of drafts, lots of data, lots of decisions to be made between the three of you when it comes to how do you take that information and extract it to either improve your cube or balance your cube in whatever you choose to do. But yeah, I think this is going to be fun.
And you're going to hear us talk about 4 cubes, even though we're 5, because one of them I'm actually taking back.
No,
to
the Doom
I'm
Cube
taking,
didn't
well,
get
it's not the Doom
mentioned.
Cube, but I am
Oh,
taking
okay,
one of
okay.
mine that you will not hear listed that I'm taking back to the wood shop. It's going to get redone. We'll just say that. We've received feedback, and it did not. It's not where I want it to be, and it's, you know, it is what it is. But
there's
that's
not
one
many-
of the learning things you get out of being a curator is that not all of these are going to be your magnum opus.
Yes, and there's
Right.
not many trees in the desert, so maybe you need another workshop.
Yeah, so we're kind of referring to the Monopoly, which did not, frankly, appeal to the masses for a lot of reasons, and I'm okay with that. Like, actually, you know, I'll take that minute to put it. May and I were talking about this beforehand. And I build my cubes not for CubeCon. I build my cubes for my friend circle, right? And Chris has actually said over and over again, Chris, you're not a big fan of desert cubes. Would you agree?
I totally agree with that. Matter of fact, I'm sorry to say this. I did put every single desert cube on the I do not wish to play on every single draft. Every single draft.
Right. And we will actually play the Monopoly again in our circle. But truth be told is sometimes you just have to, what is it? you miss every shot you don't take, right? So I wanted to do something a little different, and May and I were kind of pre-gaming about it, and it's actually was one of the, and May, pardon me, it was one of the ones that wasn't beloved at CubeCon, and I kind of caught on. It didn't take me too long to catch on to that when I'm seeing it only got drafted once, and the digital record actually got lost too. And so the reality of it is that's an opportunity for me to learn, right? And actually, I'm not a huge fan of Desert Cubes either, if I'm being completely honest. I just wanted to do something a little weird, a little wacky. And it was a fun outlet for me. And I will go back to the drawing board a little bit, but it's a learning opportunity.
I will put myself maybe as an outlier because I do enjoy the Desert Cube. I enjoy the decisions that are made when it comes to choosing a land over choosing a spell. Typically, I think my expectation before with the Desert Cube was that I would struggle to find lands if I didn't aggressively draft them, but I've not necessarily found that to be the case. So I think it's an enjoyable cube type, you know, that Desert Cube, the basic lands are in there, there's no basic land station. But like you say, maybe it's a just general cube construction lesson that needs to be learned where you're having to go over the archetypes. Are there crossovers and similarities or things that just don't appeal to the masses with the cube, you know, with the cube in its current state? And maybe that's where it needs a bit of switch up.
And I have received one piece of feedback that I did hold back for now. And May, you'll find this interesting because I found it interesting too. It was one of the players said that it felt like it was New Capenna, and New Capenna was not a beloved limited set. And so the vast majority of the cards in the Monopoly are derived from New Capenna, and I'm not a person that plays limited. So it actually made sense to me. That conversation had actually happened about 24 hours ago. So anyways, thank you, listener, for sending that out to me. I appreciate it. But we're not here to talk about the Monopoly. Just kind of wanted to say that I think there's an opportunity for curators to learn that the first time you put something out there, it's not always the best. It won't be your best. Would you all agree with that statement?
Oh, yeah. The thing is that it's okay to not make your best thing, like, first time, second time, third time does matter. It's okay to fail, because failing's a learning opportunity.
I agree with that, 100%. So let's talk about one that doesn't fail. One that was just perfect. It was just molded from, it just erupted from a volcano, and I think Chris was just standing there one day. Were you in Hawaii visiting the family when it popped out of the volcano? And you just caught that peasant cube, and you went, oh.
Oh, yeah, just totally fell on my lap. I didn't put a lot of work into it, or, you know, not at all. Didn't research the hell out of stuff, or it just sort of all came to me one day.
It just one day, just like all the numbers. It was like, you just solved pi and a cube at the same time.
My first time.
That must be so nice. Like, I'll stand under a volcano in order to get a cube.
That's pretty sweet, right? It's pretty sweet.
At me. Yeah, it's an easy deal to make.
So I have a question before we dive into Chris's cube. What is the importance of a 3-0 record and an 0-3 record as far as you looking at data? And I'll ask May first. When you're looking at these deck lists, what does it mean to you? How do you interpret it?
So 3-0s can happen for a multitude of reasons, and it doesn't always come down to a balancing issue or, let's say, a particular card being problematic because it shows up in some of those top threes. As an individual case of those top threes, it doesn't mean a lot. However, if you're seeing the same things throughout multiple top threes, then that's where it starts to become like relevant. Most people aren't going to be able to experience that unless they've had their cube in CubeCon. And we essentially just got like a couple years worth of data of equivalence of like how often people draft and whatnot, in terms of how many people are running it, how many times it's been ran and whatnot. And we now just have all this data. So yes, 3-0s are going to happen, but it can happen because of a multitude of reasons. And how important that is frankly up to the context of what your environment is, what the 3-0 decks are, and most importantly, what the players are doing.
I would actually argue as well that, yeah, you could argue a year or 2 years or whatever when it comes to the 3-0s. I would say it'd even be much longer than that when it comes to the 0 and 3 decks if you've got them at an event like this. Because let's face it, when we're hanging out on a Thursday evening, playing some Magic, hanging out, no one is really taking much, you know, they're not taking pictures and really showing a whole lot of interest in their 0-3 decks that they've drafted, right? If I just get absolutely nuked 3 times in a draft, that deck is back in the box, and I'm just like, all right, what's the next cube that we're drafting? So maybe there's a little bit more, I suppose, for the 0-3s that I would look at just because there's less data that's typically available for them.
I agree.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to
I
look
think
at
Stu's
it.
correct.
They never actually just kind of scoop out. Like, you'll see that happening on our play circle whenever, you've gotten rumple stomped and we're having a great time. I can already see, like, you'll see Anthony and Christian and Nathan over there. What are you guys doing? Oh, we're tearing down his decks. These suck. I mean, well, it's just what it is. But I guess that is something I didn't think about at these big events. People play to their outs. Or they try to play to the draw. We know that happens too, right? But they play the whole game through, and then they go to the next one because they're chasing a point system. And then I think at this large event in particular we just went to, people were incentivized to kind of stick with it because of the prize board actually gave a little bit of incentive too. That was actually pretty genius, I think.
The more competitive that the event is, the more competitive that the event is, even if you're 0-2, that one extra win that you might get for sticking it out, that could be the difference between you top 8ing if you go really, really well in the rest of your drafts. So I think that that's an important consideration. That when you're sitting around and you're hanging out, kitchen table cube draft, you're less incentivized to be as min-max as possible when it comes to your record. You're just playing for fun. But at a bigger event like that, you're trying to squeeze, or a lot of players I can imagine, not every player is going to play like that. I would say that I don't necessarily play like that. But I could imagine the more competitive it is, that players are going to look to try and squeeze every last drop out of their deck. And they might have drafted something, I for certain can say, not just when I was playing casually, but even in the years that I've been at CubeCon, certainly the year one where I'd made much more of an effort to draft more and I cared. It did have some vested interest in my record. I was trying to kind of squeeze out, what I could out of every deck that I drafted. I wanted to see how my record could improve. But that's not always the case.
What's your thoughts, Chris, before we move into your cube?
Well, I always thought that the 3-0s are it's good to see what cards helped people get there. But I'm actually, like May said, and Stu and y'all were talking, I'm actually more interested in what the 0-3 decks look like, to be honest, because I want to know what didn't get there. I want to know because that helps me kind of see maybe that archetype just isn't quite supported. Maybe it needs some help. Maybe I need to boost it in some way. Maybe because right now it looks like, not to give anything away, we have a couple of Jun decks in the 3-0 bracket. And, that may mean that's a powerful archetype. Maybe we need to work on it. But a 3-0 deck could have just drawn better, that deck. The 0-3 deck might have just not drawn as well. Might have flooded. I don't know. Yeah.
And players.
That's my 2 cents.
The player themselves. Like, I would trust a 3-0 deck over, a 0-3 deck if it's played by a maybe a not so skilled player, someone like myself. Like if I go 3-0, like, oh my god, if Stu can 3-0 with that deck, then there's got to be something broken in it, right? Whereas someone like Chris, yourself over there, who is I would consider a very strong Magic player. If you're going 0-3 with a deck with an archetype, especially if you've got all the pieces that the curators put in there purposely to make that engine tick, then I'm thinking, okay, what's going on there? And also on the flip side, if you see that deck that's 0-3, and that there's, improvements that you can identify after the fact, that in turn can have the effect of powering down those 3-0 decks or those potentially overpowered decks just by, squeezing things together.
I look at more like through like a paradoxical type outcome, I guess. Chicken egg conversation.
Returning all artifacts.
I don't care if we go from 0-3 or 3-0. It doesn't mean anything different to me. I look at the simplistic color pairings and I try to say which color was dominant and present in there, but I don't go down into the weeds really parsing out the cards because, we don't get, I guess, a footnote trying from the person who built this, trying to explain what they were attempting to accomplish and what card they pick one and why they were trying to do this and what was their build around engine. We don't get any of that. I get a deck list.
I would agree. And I'll say this, here is where having more data is fantastic. It's ultimately always going to be flawed unless literally all of these matches are played. Likely it would have to be online, save some unbelievable shift in the amount of technology that's available in these games that are played in real life and with cardboard. If they're played digitally, then you potentially have access to an amount of data that for a human might be extremely time consuming to pass. So you could be looking at, all right, what happened with the 3-0 decks? Did they just draft their curve beautifully? All the engine pieces came online when necessary, and they just breezed through their games. What about those 0 and 3s? Did they draw land? Did they flood out? Did they, what was the deck construction? Did they miss, key pieces for the archetype that they were looking to put together? So I would say take it not necessarily with a grain of salt, but context is very important, especially when I think looking at both of the ends of the spectrum.
So let's go ahead and hop into Chris's Peasant Cube. And let's start out with, I guess we have main event number 1, which 3-0'd, and we have an image that you can take a look at. And I've kind of looked at these because I clipped them and put them in the show notes, but you can also find these, and I included that on the CubeCon website. They so graciously have now put little trophies at the corners of the cubes, -1. But you'll get that joke when you see it. But yeah, but you will see it. And then go ahead and look at these lists and you can find out what's happening here. So let's talk about I guess this is your first event where it was actually the first round.
That's what I'm assuming. It says main event 1. I'm assuming that was the morning of the first day. It looks like a pretty strong kind of aristocratic style deck. So it looked pretty neat.
So you're seeing aristocrats, and I do see aristocrats. I do see the pieces in there. I see Sir Conrad, and I see these components. And so when I was going through these deck lists of all of yours, loading them up, I was trying to find cards that were common. And so if I saw repeats of, say, for instance, Sir Conrad in all the 3-0 decks, then I would have something I could put a pin in. But what I can say, and what I kind of talked to you about earlier, is this first one, I'm just going to call it Jund, and it's aristocrats, Jund aristocrats, which we kind of thought that was a known quantity going in. Would you agree with that statement?
I did. Yeah, I knew it was strong, but I'm also glad it didn't take all the matches either, which is kind of nice, it's really nice to hear, actually. I'm kind of happy with that, to be honest. I don't want it to be a dominant deck. I want it to be a good deck. I just don't want it. I want all the decks to be very good and have a chance to 3-0. This one, it's a very good deck. I've always liked the aristocrats at the Peasant level.
Do you think that there's potentially some bias there because you want the Jund aristocrats deck to be powerful? And I'm picking on that as a comment because just we're looking at this right now. And this is a kind of a philosophical question to all three of you, but is that ever a consideration when you're looking at any of the archetypes in any of the cubes, again, especially with this extra amount of data? How much do you consider that personal internal bias could be affecting those decisions and how you're interpreting either the 3-0 or the 0-3s? If you're looking at that 0-3 list, then you're thinking, oh man, they did badly, but I know it's good and I know it can work because I have an affinity for it. Then sure, maybe that bias is going to go in a way that is not going to lend to a good improvement of the cube in general and of that archetype. Yes. And then on the flip side as well. May's looking like, yes.
yes. I'm constantly thinking about it. In fact, I've spent a lot of time probably overly concerned about it because there's a lot of times where it's just like, do I want this archetype to exist because I want it to be there? Or is it because something that actually people are interested in drafting? Or, hey, do I want these cards in here just because it actually improves the environment or because it's little pet cards of mine? And that's constantly a consideration when I'm looking at either packages or individual cards and whatnot. There's been several times in this past couple weeks that I've been looking at the Sarah Angel and Shivan Dragon in my cube and being like, do we actually need these in this cube anymore?
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
No, come on. I mean, it's Sarah Angel. It's Shivan Dragon.
I love having them there, but that's also why I have my doubts.
I think bias plays a huge, huge role.
Oh, yeah.
You can't get away from it. This is your baby. This is something that you've worked really hard on. And it's but that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with playing a Shivan Dragon or Sarah Angel in your cube. They are definitely not the best in slot anymore. Without a doubt, best in slot. But they're fun. But I don't run them in mine. I could. I choose not to.
We're trying to get him to run Shivan Dragon. He's literally he's grabbing onto this so hard.
Yeah,
got downgraded.
Shivan Dragon is uncommon.
Bring it back, baby. Bring it back. Let's get that Shivan in there.
Shivan Dragon's been downgraded?
Yes, it has.
Uncommon.
Hell yes. I've been asking for that for a while.
That's why you notice that he was sugarcoating that, and he's like, it's okay. We know it's not that great. And he does. What you don't know, listeners, is we're please put Shivan Dragon in there. I'm willing to lose with that card every day, all day.
Yeah, TCG Player
Look, I have been begging for it to be moved to uncommon. There was no reason for it to be at rare for as long as it has been. I'm sorry. I'll
totally
stop my
agree with
rant.
you on that. I totally agree with you on that. It should not have been rare for a very long time.
It only took 30 years. It's okay.
Let's put it this way. No. Back in Alpha Beta days, it needed to be rare. It absolutely had to be rare. Yeah. It was the king. It was the king of everything, back then. But now I'm sorry.
I thought they didn't do rarity symbols then. Am I wrong in saying that? In Alpha and Beta, did they have rarity symbols? They didn't have them. So wasn't it uncommon then, technically?
They had a rarity, but there was no...
They were still rare, man. Yeah. Come on.
Yeah.
I had 4 of them that I bought from baseball card shops. I don't know how rare that was. In Boise, Idaho, nonetheless. In different shops. But...
You should have been buying that Honus Wagner instead. Just an FYI.
But let me ask a question. So when I look at this, and before we move on to the next one, again, I see John. And to put that in perspective, we'll have it in the show notes, and it's on the CubeCon website with a little trophy beside it under Sammich's Peasant Cube. You'll find that either here or there. But when he says Jund Aristocrats, he's referring to cards like we mentioned, Sir Conrad, and then they have Mortapod, and then you'll see the Forsaken Miner, and you'll see Siege Gang, Lieutenant. So there's enough pieces in there, but we also got some blue mix in there because this is probably just a pile of cards before it got formed up. But you can definitely see that I think that was the intent, so that's how we're working with this. That's another interesting dynamic. When we go to these events, not everybody, and we were trying to ask, like, please, present your actual deck list. But if not, it's kind of fun to try to sort through this too. At least if you gave me this pile of cards, I know what I would build. Would you agree, Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely see a deck in here that is very playable, and obviously was, because it went 3-0. So.
Jund is pretty, card quality. That's kind of the ethos, at least, the modern Jund decks over the last number of years have been, going for the 2-for-1s and just card quality over card quantity, or, just working individually. And a lot of these cards are just very, very good cards by themselves, and not to necessarily just call it a Jund good stuff deck. But there's definitely kind of a good stuff vibe about it as well. A lot of these cards are very, very capable, if unanswered, of winning the games by themselves. But yeah, I agree. These kind of decks are fun, and nothing in here strikes me. At least I've reviewed all these. We did the pre-game. I looked at these over the last few days. There's nothing that sticks out that's like, man, that card's got to go, or this needs an improvement. So I think that's great.
Yeah, we got to get all this data. So this next one we're looking at, Chris, this is main event 3. I think we're out of order here, and this 3-0'd as well, too. But again, we can call out some of these cards. I'm seeing it's not Jund Aristocrats this time around. It's just Jund, and they are Junding it out the way that I would actually do Jund.
Yeah, it's Jund value, basically, is the way I'm looking at it. It's a lot of ETB creatures with some ways to bring things back, just with a good amount of removal. And yeah, it just looks like a solid style of deck.
This to me is definitely card quality. Definitely the last deck had a lot of very high quality cards in it, but this is almost, I don't want to say a control deck, but it has really, really nice removal, really good creatures on curve. It has an animate dead in there as well, so heaven forbid, your fatty or your big utility creature, or even just something that you need to push yourself over the edge has gone to the graveyard, then you can bring it back. This is, to me, such a prototypical value Jund deck that there's no surprises to me that this is a 3-0.
And they've got Noise Marine, they've got Bloodbraid Elf, they've got Gonti. I mean, this is value deck, right? If I was Junding it out in any kind of light legacy cube, these cards would also apply too. So I think it was interesting. You saw 2 different types of players as we went through. One that was okay with kind of the thematic slow roll, the Jund value aristocrats, and this one here is just on curve. I'm here just to Jund this out, and I like that a lot.
Well, it's Jund, but it's also a very different Jund.
They're different Junds. I agree 100%.
Yeah, that to me, it makes me very happy to see that there were, because I do support both of these styles of decks. So yeah, that's really what I want.
In the same color scheme. When I looked at it first, I had originally kind of pinned this for Chris, and I said Jund, and now we're going to mention what I believe is Azorius. We have to kind of guess that. Maybe Merca, if we're seeing it, but probably Azorius.
Yeah.
Uncertain, TBD.
It's splashing some red.
Blue-white deck. There's very little red. It's a blue-white deck.
Yeah, so it's interesting now that you've got 3 different 3-0 decks. That's good. That's healthy. I like seeing that. I think, would you be concerned as a curator, my question for you is if all 3 of your top 3-0s were all Jund, would that bug you in any way?
A little bit, yes. It would mean I'd have to go in and look at what's going on with that. Why are the other cards not wanting to be drafted? If they're either not wanting to be drafted or they are just not strong enough on their own, the other ones to work. And I'd want to look at maybe boosting those other colors up to be able to match the Jund Menace, I guess. But in this case, I'm not worried about that. But yes, if that were the case, I would worry about that. I would be looking at Jund real hard and say, why is this deck the best deck? And try to figure that out. And why are these other decks not working?
So in this list here we're looking at, and we have to make some assumptions here, but we do see a little bit of a control Flyers Azorius type element to it. I mean, we've got the Mana Leaks, and what is
Psionic
that?
Blast?
Psionic Blast,
Yeah,
yes.
that was one I was going to highlight as well. Any cube, let's make that announcement, right? It's just from me, but any cube that has Psionic Blast in it is a win, in my opinion.
But I like that this person also integrated, it looks like a little bit of Flicker. They've got like Frost Trickster, but then you'll see Flicker Wisp in there. You'll see some other like fairies that are integrated, Path to Exile. They're playing powerful magic. Looks like they're trying to rule the skies kind of a little bit. Control tempo to me is what I have to assume. Yep. And then maybe
and potentially a win with the Luxodon Warhammer and things like that.
Yeah, even Bone Splinter on these Flyers. It looks aggressive. It looks aggressive. It looks like they're controlling what's happening in the scenario. They got Lose Focus, Miscalc, Mana Leak. So I'm curious to see like what that blend was. But they even got like Barrow Blade or Barrow Blade. So there's a lot of options here. It's an interesting little build. But it's, to me, when I was going through these, I was asking myself, I was hoping not to see a third Jund. The same thing that I wouldn't want to see in any of my environments. So this is pleasing to me. What are your final thoughts on these decks?
I'm very happy to see the diversity and the way people are obviously playing the cube, and it means that it's probably a fairly healthy environment. They may not be the best. It probably needs some work. Every cube always needs some work. But, I'm going to try to take this information and see what I can do to make it even more fun.
Yeah, I mean, you've got all 5 colors well represented across these 3-Os, right? 2 Jund decks, and then a mostly Azorius. And let's face it, there's some splashes of green and red in this last deck. So I think that's got to be so positive, right? I would agree. I think I would be pretty proud of a cube that has 2 color schemes that have been played in very different ways, and then a third deck that's majority of the other colors, and all 3 of them went 3-0. Again, I think you really have to be careful with the data because context is so very important, but I'd be pretty proud of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll take this. Data's data. I just want to see if there's commonalities, same colors, same cards. Other than that, my personal view on this is there's too much variance, player skill, like you said, drawing lands, how they built their deck, how they constructed it. There's so much variance. How are they feeling that day, right? I mean, there's too many variables to go, oh, well, I can actually extrapolate actual empirical data from this. I know you can't. And that's what's so beautiful about Magic is there's variance.
Yeah.
And so we have to make a lot of assumptions.
And look, you don't need no Shiv and Dragon anymore because Cheeky House Mouse is going 3-0.
I'd prefer Shiv and Dragon. May, bring back Shiv and Dragon. May's rocking that Shiv and Dragon. She knows. She knows. All right.
I do love my big stinky dragon.
We've got a new set that's just come out. And I wanted to ask this question. This is a little bit. So now that you've got this data, we're going to call air quotes data, from CubeCon, Chris, are there any cards from Foundations that you think will provide any kind of improvements or things you want to change up a little bit based on what you just learned or already have learned?
Well, I've definitely got a few cards that I'm looking at right now. And I know you got some in the show notes, but I do have some extra ones. I guess maybe, Anthony, you'll add them in. I don't know if you're going to do that or not.
May or may not. We'll see.
But right. This one is really neat. It's called a Mischievous Mystic. And it's a 2/1 flyer for 1 and a blue. It's a human wizard. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 blue fairy creature with flying. Very simple. I've already got the white analog of that, I think, already in there. That Clarion Spirit, I think, is maybe casting your second spell. That kind of does the same thing. But I kind of have this little draw your second card theme anyway, as it is. There's also a Fairy Vandal in there as well. And that's just one of the ones I really liked it. I don't know how y'all feel about that one.
I like that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I love it enough that I'm considering it for the Fae Cube.
I like it.
So-
I think
There you
it's
go.
it's
Yeah.
like Talrand from Temu.
It's no Shivan Dragon, but it's pretty okay.
You're right. It's not Shivan Dragon. You're absolutely right. It's not. Yay.
What else you got?
Another one that I really liked was called Sun Consecrated Healer. This is another 2-drop for 1 and a white. It's another human cleric and it has Kicker 1 and white and lifelink, and it's a 3/1. And when it enters, if the kicker was paid, you return a non-land permanent with value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield.
Ooh.
So it's a nice little 4-drop that brings back a 2-drop. And it doesn't have to be a creature. It can be a permanent, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, and 3/1 with lifelink is no joke either.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
There's some nice
That card is
stats.
very nice. That's one I really liked. And another one that I liked was called the Vampire Gourmand. And this is another card. It's got the 1 and a black for a vampire, 2/2. When it attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, draw a card, and this creature can't be blocked this turn.
This is Foundations we're talking about, and the reason why we're mentioning this is because we're currently in almost the end of spoiler season, coming out soon, actually on my birthday, which is pretty sweet. So we're going to have a birthday Foundations party, which is kind of neat because, 47's a big one. That's a big one. Everybody knows that. I know, right?
Wow.
I made it around the sun again. But what's interesting about the coming back from CubeCon, Chris and myself and Christian, when we're driving back, these were some of the kind of conversations we had because of, I guess, the extent of play that I was having where I'm kind of in the matches and didn't have a lot of breaks. I didn't get the social butterfly opportunity that I really wanted to ask people what was happening while it was happening. That is why I am there, actually. So we had to kind of guess on what we saw when we're walking around tables, glancing over shoulders, try not to interrupt games. And so we kind of try to take a little bit of that like we did last time we came back when Stu and all of us were riding back and we're like, you should cut this card from the artifact cube. You should add this card. We did the same thing.
It was
It's fun.
incredible, actually, how we managed to, it was a 17-hour drive back
thing.
to
It's a
North
group
Carolina.
thing session.
Yeah, and we had 5 people in a minivan, and everyone was able to fill that time with discussion about their cubes, what worked, what didn't work, what they liked. Doesn't even have to be about your own cube. In fact, a lot of it wasn't about our own cubes or your own cubes. It was about experiences that you'd had with other cubes. And I think, again, we're talking about your cube and May's cube and Chris's cube. So you got all this data that you're now able to share, obviously from a philosophical standpoint that you hope can be beneficial to other curators as well. But that kind of goes to show just how much there is to talk about. And that was like the next day that we had all that 17 hours of conversation.
Yeah, and nobody actually hits record on anything. That's the one thing we're doing wrong here, folks. But let's move over to the Femme, and I want to let me double back for a second. I hope that peasant curators out there, we're gonna have more content from Chris because he is our present guru. Because as I'm looking at cards, and I called out some that I think are better than his, he told me I'm wrong. But here we are. What about that? Let me ask you real quick though. What about the Baby Archon? What's up with the not adding the Baby Archon? I mean, that card is ridiculous.
No, I love that card. That card might go in. It's a nice little.
What do you mean by it's Baby Archon? Could you please tell Stu what that does? It's better than Shivan Dragon. I can't move on.
It's for 4 and 2 black. It's a demon, a 5/4 flying demon, and as an additional cost, you have to sacrifice a creature. But when it enters, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. You draw a card and gain 2 life. So it is mini Archon.
It is. All right.
You like it now, don't you? I see.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a black creature that enters, has a relevant ability, and slaps.
Yep.
You're gonna have to do something pretty bad to not make me a fan of a card like that.
I just want to pull Stu into that conversation before we moved on.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I knew you'd like that one.
Like I don't talk enough as it is, with my ramblings.
So May and I are let's take on the Femme together, May. Let's you and I do this one because May,
Sure.
I give full credit to May for helping me get this into CubeCon 2024. And May, I mean, from the deepest part of my heart, I'm going to tell you thank you because this cube, I think, moved people. Maybe I'm wanting it, but I felt that when I saw young women sitting around playing this cube, that's what I wanted to see. That brought me so much joy.
It was definitely what I wanted to exist at CubeCon. I wanted there to be a sort of appreciative cube there that we could really go to and find ourselves in. And while getting the Femme Cube has kind of been rocky from the start, but I feel like that once people started to understand what the vision was with it, then it was easier to get people to actually sit down and actually be excited to play it. And that's ultimately what the goal was.
This one I'll proudly resubmit next year. This one's probably the one that I'm going to try again, and we'll work on it together, May, and I'll ask others to consult with, and I just want to make this cube better. But I think for the most part, this one was successful. But I did give an overarching as we go through these deck lists that white is too strong, and we knew that actually going in. That was kind of a conversation that we had all kind of talked about in previous episodes, that some of the cards that specifically in white, and then a little bit in Boros, but mostly in white, that the representation, the heroines of that story, the Thalias and whatnot, I don't know what it is. They draw me in, and I put them in there, Elspeths and Thalias and whatnot. But there's a point where you can definitely see a theme in the majority of the decks. It was played 4 times, and you will see kind of white doing the thing that white does, very aggro. So I have to try to figure that one out. And when I'm looking at foundations, I'm taking your advice on this one, May, and this is something that I meant to put as a header at the beginning of our conversation. It's something that you have said that's really resonated with me, is that not to cut cards from your best deck, but to give the other decks tools to compete with the best deck is such an interesting way of thinking about it. Like, I guess I never thought about it. I always try to, nullify the problem, I guess, and to the point where you start kind of, as Chris has stated, it's digging in the sand. They will replace, something else will surface. There's no way around it. But what if you gave little apexes or peaks to the other archetypes, to the other decks, the other colors? So I want to work with you, May, specifically, prepping this over the next year for UberCubeathon and for other events that we're going to try to make this cube a little bit more balanced. But I think we can do it together.
Yeah. And I will be extremely excited to help you work on it, because I think that it is worth the effort.
Yeah, this is one that I think is great. So let's talk about I've got them, they're a little bit out of sync, a little out of order, but this one was, and I was very proud, played 4 times. This one's the one out of all my cubes that got the most play, which is, frankly, I can take that. I can take all jokes aside.
It was a big win for you.
Yeah, I'll take this one, and the rest of them can go in the garbage. This is what I wanted, right? This is the thing. If nothing else even got into CubeCon, this is what Stu
You can throw them in my garbage.
I will throw them in your garbage.
Yes.
Let's start with the dumpster fire and the Monopoly, and then we'll go from
Sure,
there.
yeah, absolutely. Toss them in.
But I actually wanted this one to be the one that surfaced, and I was so happy. So thank you for the listeners. Thank you for everybody at CubeCon that supported and voted for this. And especially thank you to May, Emma, and Bob for helping me get this in. So let's talk about this first deck. Main event number 1. We're seeing a Selesnya deck, and I want to talk about some of these pieces, and you guys tell me if you're seeing the same thing I'm seeing. So I'm looking at cards. It's your Arbor Elves and Jade Mage, which I love that somebody ran that, and Anafenza, and we've got Glimmerlands, and we've got Thalia, the Heretic Cathar. I don't really see any egregious offenders yet. The one card that does catch my eye is Hero Bladehold. You probably will see that in a couple of them. I wanted to ask you guys, is it too strong for this cube?
Okay.
I
don't think it is. I really do believe, as someone that has really enjoyed drafting this cube, every time you pull it out, and whenever we're hanging out on a Thursday night and you're like, hey, I've got my bag of cubes, or I've brought cubes with me, you know that there's 2 cubes of yours that I love drafting above any of the other, specifically of your cubes, which is the Femme and the Horror. Whenever I draft this cube, the same advice that I would give to anyone is, if you want to win, you draft white. The quality of the cards is very good, but it's the sum of their parts rather than just an individual card quality. And the card quality themselves individually is very strong. But this is just a case of not just are the white cards so very strong, but they amplify. We're looking at this deck right now. It's got a bunch of green cards. It's a green-white deck. It's very, very strong. We can go through on the other decks and look. You've got white-green with some splash. You've got white-red. Those cards are also individually very powerful, but the white cards, as well as this individual strength that they have this huge amplification effect. One card that I will always sort of pick out is Luminarch Aspirant. Is just absolutely one of the most bonkers cards in this whole cube. It's one of the most bonkers cards in any cubes. If it's a very sort of creature turning sideways reliant that is going to be a way that is going to win games, right? The most effective way to win games in any cube is turning creature sideways. The ability to just keep making them bigger and more powerful every turn for no mana investment and no other card investment is going to be a huge advantage every turn. And that is always a card that I will take that last pick. I'll hate draft it, whatever needs to be done. But those are the kind of glue cards that it has, again, as well as all that individual card quality.
I think the only one that generally that I would also add on to that is that you have cards like Adeline in here. And maybe that's just my commander bias, but like Adeline's just a very good card. And that's just kind of what white is just a pile of really good cards.
Well, so ultimately that was going to be my takeaway, and I'm glad you brought that up, because the two cards that I was looking at, and I was going to do one of the two, we're going to probably get cut. And I don't know if it's going to fix it, or not cut, but try to replace with something that's a little bit more plain, would either be Adeline or Hero. And these are two cards that I actually caught because you'll see a theme. Let's move over to the next deck. Now we're moving into Boros, which will be included in the show notes. It's almost not a Boros. It'd be more of a Mardu, I think, is what it was captured here, because it does have Lurrus in it. But you'll also see some cards in this one that Stu recognized early on. Luminarch Aspirant shows up again. Glimmerlens shows up again. And then Adeline shows up, not again, but kind of in the same form, if you will, right? And this one 3-0. Then you got Anafenza again. These are value cards, and they're counters, and they're making your creatures bigger. And in our individual play group, Chris, would you say you've played this a lot, and Stu, you've played this a lot? I normally see the Rock win, or I see, I guess, Flicker win, Blink win, right? It's a little different for me now to see aggro deck surface. Do you think this was just like laser ride players not want to do the gimmick? They went for like straight lines?
I will make this statement.
They're trying to win, man.
Yeah, they're trying to win.
Aspirant does that.
Yeah.
And Adeline does that.
Yeah, you don't have
a source of plowshares. That's also a potential problem as well. I'd zoom in on that.
Lightning Helix.
Lightning Helix is.
I'm not cutting all of Boros.
Huh?
Oh, let it keep smacking.
It does in our play group. These don't smack. What we had already addressed was the fact that Gruul and the Rock was winning the most games. It's so wild to me to see Boros and suddenly Selesnya winning the most games, because we just changed metas.
Well, you've got, again, let's go all the way back to the discussion that we had on Chris's Peasant Cube, is this is a competitive environment. It's not Thursday night where you're sitting around having a few beers and just playing for an hour or so, and then everyone goes home because got to get up for work in the next morning. Now they're playing to win. And let's be honest, going all the way up the food chain, to the Vintage Cube, if you want to win, it's not difficult to win if you just go straight up, Boros, aggressive, turn my creature sideways, whatever hate bears I can throw in there, I'm going to put in there. So these people that are out there at any event, yeah, sure, it's wonderful when you can construct some elaborate combo deck that can win on turn 4 with Brain Freeze and Underworld Breach and Lion's Eye Diamond or whatever. But sometimes, you know what's really, really good to win games and win series and win events is just putting creatures on the battlefield and turning them sideways. And this deck and the other decks in this cube that went 3-0, that's what they do.
Well, I'll let you know tonight, because I'm actually drafted the Arena Cube, and I'm thinking about start to do some recordings to add to our YouTube channel through OBS. So I've actually already drafted a deck, and it's all literally these cards. I'm doing Boros Aggro and the Arena Cube.
And how's that going?
I'm going to let you know tonight. I got the deck built. As soon as we're done recording, I go back to the house. That's what I'm doing tonight. And I will give you an update. Let's move over to the next one. I think this might shock you a little bit here, though. And now...
Oh my gosh, I can't believe
Look
it.
at there, Mardu.
It's another deck with white in it.
Yeah. I thought that might shock you a bit.
You brought up like a Luminarch Aspirant.
It might be there again.
It might be there again. But you know what else is also there?
Hero of Bladehold.
Hero of Bladehold. And Alicia, who smiles at death. All those cards. Now you've got multiple cards in multiple decks with multiple 3-0s. I will absolutely agree that in order to reduce the power level of one deck is to bring up the power of other decks, right? No doubt about it. That can have a significantly positive improvement on the overall balance of your cube. But sometimes...
Well, my biggest problem that I have with this cube...
There might be one or two cards
some of these
might just be a little
I'm 100%
problematic.
Cutting some of these back. I already know this is going to happen. Like, it's going to have to
Cathar
happen.
Commando? That's another.
I gotta figure it out. I gotta figure it out. I don't want to nerf aggro, but everybody's right, and it wasn't hard to see here. It's literally gleaning at me right now. But at the same time, with the restriction that I have in this cube, man, I've talked about this. Like, it has to be a woman. It has to be tasteful art. It has to be, something that's not. I'm not doing double face
Insert
cards
list
anymore.
of credentials here.
Right. And so that makes this even harder. So that's when Foundations is coming out. We'll talk about this in a second. That's why I'm like, please give me a card to fill in these voids. I'll be okay with like powering down a few of these if I could find something. I'm actually looking at the alternate arts. And as of today, I didn't find anything in white to nerf these down. So now I got to go through the archives again, which is an important thing that actually, Chris, this is a little pin that we'll put in here. And we're going to talk about this in a future episode. But Chris has kind of got me on this idea where for a little while I couldn't figure out why Chris was running his Peasant Cube, like counterpoint cards that give like protection like snakeskin veils, and we're going to talk about that here in the future, or cards that act in such a way that kind of like you're targeting my creature, but you can't, just for that one moment in time, that I think I'm going to add to this cube because it creates like this interaction dynamic where you're just trying to kill a creature because it's turning sideways, and then I get to counterpoint you, but not with counter magic. I think that's fascinating, actually. So I'm going to try to find some Femme cards that will apply to this cube to take out some of the white cards. That's on my list of things to do. Let's go over this next one, though. It might blow your mind here. There's an outlier. Now we got one that I didn't think would 3-0 at all, and they actually took a whole deck list. You guys look at this one. This one's important. It's Dimir. I did not expect this. This one was refreshing to me. I'm like, holy cow.
So, I made some notes about this, right? This is a nice deck. Very, very nice deck. I would be very happy to play a deck that has good card quality when it comes to cantrips like Opt and Serum Visions. It has some good counterspell options like Counterspell, like Memory Lapse. And it also has some good removal spells like Go for the Throat. Right?
Or Bloodchief's Thirst.
Yeah, so like those cards.
They built a well-balanced control deck.
They did, right? What I don't want to say necessarily struggling to see is, but I would love to have the much more data, much more detailed information about how this deck played. Because, sure, you could drop a Vendilion Click and attack like 7 times and they're dead. How many times did they have their Planeswalkers online? I would love to know if they would just got so lucky that Saheeli came out turn 3, their opponents were slow. Well, Lolth is obviously a little later, but you get Saheeli out turn 3, you get to get some removal spells, some ups and counter spells in there. Now all of a sudden you've got a bit of an army on the battlefield, and then maybe you drop your Planeswalker, your large one in Lolth, and kind of end the game. This is where having some context in the data can be so important. On the surface, yeah, absolutely. It looks very fun. The reason why control decks can be very, very difficult to play in any kind of format is because you're so reliant on sort of the matching of what you are presenting as the control elements of your deck with what your opponent is doing. And if those don't match up very well, then you can find yourself getting overwhelmed, or it could even be 1 or 2 creatures that you land that just take over the game. So that's something that I question about this. They obviously did that 3 times. They obviously built a very, very good deck. Card quality is very high. But I struggle to...
It looks to me like they have card draw advantage, like as a central theme.
Yeah, card draw is there too.
They got Memory Deluge, they got Serum Visions, they've got Opt, they've got Merfolk Looter.
Glenalendra's in there, baby.
Right, so they're really controlling the scenario and keeping their hand filled. Where maybe they were playing against... I want to pretend they were playing against a Boros player that just runs out of cards, right? Like all their threats just get nerfed. That is refreshing for me to see. I'm actually happier to have seen this than say like a mid-range Golgari deck that just stymied the rest of it. Like this is a better outcome for me personally. So kudos to this player. Let's talk about some of the Foundations cards and we'll keep it short and sweet. There's only one that I really want to talk about. It's the biggest one that I'm excited about. Dark Confidant.
Yeah.
Has a woman. Slamma Jamma.
Bob is now Beth.
Oh my God, I am so adding that card to this cube. Like, there is a dream list of cards, Wizards, that I wanted, and thank you for Dark Confidant. The other one's Young Peasy.
Maybe we need to get, someone on the podcast at some point that can have some greater influence on the art and potential inclusions on some of these cubes. But I would imagine anyone out there, no one's going to be sad to see another reprint of Dark Confidant. And this, I mean, it just ticks all the boxes, and look how well it matches with this cube.
And that'll provide more tools for that other scenario, the rock scenario,
Exactly.
etc. So
Yep.
that's kind of what we've talked about when we had Emma Partlow on, when I was mentioning the fact that Blood Artist finally got a woman that I can imply to the art that made a difference to the Aristocrats package. These are the type of cards that I need. I mentioned this, May.
Yep.
This is the slowest built cube in the history of slowest built cubes because I need the cards to come out. Luckily, it's not Shivan Dragon. Wink, wink, Christian. Or Chris. I called you that again. All right.
I would actually. I would.
Did it again.
I did it again.
I would actually, as much as I'm really happy for Dark Confidant, I want to mention this one very, very quickly. This was one, again, all these cards are in the show notes. There's a few cards in the show notes. We're not going to go through all of them. But I want to mention Ophelia Viper Whisperer. This is 1 and a black, legendary creature, Gorgon Assassin, 1/3 Death Touch. When it attacks, you may pay 1 and either black or green. If you do, create a 1/1 black snake creature token with Death Touch. And then you can pay 4 and a black until end of turn whenever 1 or more Gorgons and or snakes you control deal combat damage to a player. That player loses half of their life rounded up. This, to me, I love cards like this that... it's a really good card. It's got 3 very, very good abilities for only 2 mana, and being a 1/3 is a good like anti-aggro, and especially with Death Touch, like really can be problematic, especially if you put it in a control deck when you're playing against an aggro deck. But I love cards like this that are just they're tension pieces, as we always love to use that word, right? Tension. They create tension in games. Do you want to attack with your big creature and have it, just go up against the 2 mana that your opponent has put up against it? I'm more excited for cards like that. Not that I'm not excited for Bob, but of all the cards that you've put in our show notes, again, I would really encourage all of our listeners, go check it out. That is one that I'm particularly excited about for this cube.
And another thing that we've actually had that's been problematic in this cube is counters. You'll notice that a lot of my counters are like pay 2 or Mana Leak style, right? They're
Sure.
the cost versions, but I have very little access to hard counters. And normally I wouldn't be on board with a cancel, but this card Refute has an alternate art that's really good. So for 1 colorless and blue, get an instant counter target spell, draw a card, then discard a card. And it has a beautiful, it's a beautiful woman. May, is that a woman? We're calling it here. There's alternate art. But it's gorgeous. I just want to check that. We're going to fact check that. But it's just the type of thing that I want to have in my cube if I can have it. It's like
It looks like the face of a lady.
It's a woman. Yeah, I'll actually look up a little bit of lore. What does it say at the bottom of it?
I think, again, you kind of have to... You're going to do your due diligence and make sure that, that the appropriate parties have been consulted on this. But I think, that for me, on the surface, this looks like a very, very valid inclusion. And I agree 100%. As much as I will say, Mana Leak's a hard counter. Paying an extra 3 mana is basically a hard counter 90% of the time. And that loot effect is really cool as well. So I love this as an inclusion. Bye-bye cancel. You will not be missed.
Right. And then one that May and I put it in my show notes, because May, we talked about this for the Fae Cube, and you said absolutely not, but it was High Fae Trickster. You want to tell them what this does?
Yeah, so High Fae Trickster is 3 and a blue for a fairy wizard for a 2. It's a fairy wizard with flash and flying. You may cast spells as though they had flash. Period. So let's start off from the top of this is a 4 mana 4/2 flash flying. So not only is this like a huge power swing with evasion, but you also get to cast anything else in your deck as though they have flash.
I almost feel
and that's the part that I kind of had to step back a bit and be like, okay, that's a bit much.
Yeah, I would agree. That almost feels like, did they really just mean to print that as with all spells? I don't know. Yes. I'm happy. It's for me, it's a little... I don't want to say it's overpowered. I don't think it is, because it's still just a 4/2 with flying for 4.
For context, right?
But it's very good.
My Fae Cube has Stingblade Assassin, which is 3 and a black for a 3/1 flash flying, and when it enters, destroy something. It comes in and can essentially kill something that's already been dealt damage. So it has the potential of getting a +1 on impact. It's also just a big body that can come in for the same mana. But even this one, I was on the edge of, this might be too strong as an aggressive card, but it's at least at only 3 power, right? High Fae Trickster at 4 power is good.
Yeah.
And I think in the Fae Cube, in the Femme Cube, it would be a great addition.
Yeah, I think it'll actually pick up a little of those control decks that I want to see a little bit more.
Yeah.
It gives a little bit of power, but it's also splashable, so it's really hard for me to say simply.
Flashing Glen and Undra.
Right, they're literally going to flash in their Luminarch Aspirant now, so I don't know what to do about that. But, I can't control the world. But I think this card gives a weird kind of control-y mid-range type card. There was one more that I thought was interesting, and I'll leave it at that. It was Bonecaller Cleric. For 1 colorless and 1 black. Stu wants this one. He wants to talk about this one so bad.
I love this card. Love it. Because it's a 2-mana 2/1 for 2, which is unassuming, right? But it's got a 3 colorless and 1 black, sack it and reanimate.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah,
Don't
that's
lose
all I
life.
need, because that's another thing.
Nothing else, just value.
So if the cube lacks in things because they haven't been printed, is Reanimator. Aristocrats is okay. Hard cancels have been problematic, and so I'm glad to get the one, even though it costs 3. I'm okay with that. And then the other thing was evasion to attack planeswalkers, which was brought up at CubeCon. Like if I put out Big Elspeth, they didn't know how to get around the wall. I failed to mention that one of the fixes that I have since ordered is unblockable creatures. Chris and I talked about that post. That was our drive back from CubeCon. So solutions, when you go to these big events, you get a lot of feedback. You have to kind of take some of it with a grain of salt. Some of it's emotionally based, but some of it was very like holistic, 40,000 feet, looking at the cube and other curators saying, this is what I would do to fix this scenario. And that was one of the things, is add blue to have a little bit more of a air quotes ninjas type of theme, so that they can at least get, or, so they can get in there, attack, tempo, control. And then I think it'll be a fix. What do you guys think?
I hope so.
And then I got trimmed back a little bit of the white cards. I know this for certain.
I hope so, for the sake of the non-white drafters in this cube, at least based on the stats.
Yeah, I was told white was a little OP.
But,
our good friend Dan Lupe
we'll
reached
see.
out to me and said that was the data overarching. And I talked to people too, and we knew this going in May. We already kind of talked about white kind of being the boogeyman in the Femme cube, and it did transpire, to be expected. So that's going to kind of conclude those 2 cubes, and I appreciate the listeners showing up, and I hope you got something out of this. What we kind of learned about this is, how do we evaluate 3-0 decks or 0-3 decks? What happens if your cube isn't well received? Because you just kind of have to take it all with a grain of salt, and it's okay. And then we kind of learned about, like, how do you, I guess, ultimately, May taught us this, how to take the other decks and give them tools to combat the best decks instead of nerfing the best decks.
Subtraction by addition.
It's not a bad way to do it. It's not.
So I think we want to do this, right? I think we want to stop here. Mm-hmm. And I think we want to say thank you to everyone for listening. We're going to limit this at 2 cubes because I think there's so much to talk about. Yes, we've gone through some of the philosophical stuff, but I think this will continue as we move on to our next cube. So we're going to move on, and we're going to say thank you for listening. Please tune in next time for part 2, where we're going to break down 2 more cubes from CubeCon 2024 and just really break down that data and those thought processes that are going to be so valuable to anyone out there. If you're fortunate enough to get a cube included at a CubeCon or any other event, so much valuable information, ways to pass that data, ways to sort of weigh things up when it comes to the context or lack thereof, and just how to use whatever means are available to you to put your cubes in the best place possible. All right, first of all, big thanks to all of our Patreons. I don't even know, I'm not going to name everybody, but it's just been so fantastic for all of the support. You guys all know who you are. Big thank you again to all of you for helping keeping the lights on and just showing support for the podcast. Some of you guys have been there for a very, very long time, and even for our new ones, again, huge thanks for the ongoing support. It really means a lot. And again, that microphone stand is coming soon. I want to sort of encourage everyone, check out the show notes for all of the resources that are available to our listeners and to all of the Cube curators out there when it comes to the drafting page on Facebook, our ultrasleeves.com/UberCube and intgaming.com/UberCube affiliate links. Go check them out. They've got all kinds of cool products out there to give you a little boost for your Magic experience. Find us at Twitter at UberCubeMTGPod and reach us via email UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. Again, come hang out with us on the Discord. All kinds of cool things going on over there. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you enjoy the show, and we'll see you in the next one.
And then other than that, we're going to say the thing that we always say here at UberCube is...
Happy cubing!